The case of Sarah Grace Patrick. Part 2. Sarah's defense team argued she was being misunderstood. They said she was traumatized, that the searches were mere curiosity, and that her odd behavior was a coping mechanism. But the judge wasn't convinced. When the prosecution replayed portions of her TikTok messages, the courtroom turned cold. The judge watched as Sarah described the case surrounding her parents' deaths as super interesting. That phrase lingered in the air like smoke. Her bond request was denied. She would remain in custody until trial. Outside the courthouse, the community gathered in disbelief. Candles burned for James and Kristen Brock. Friends placed photos of the couple beside handwritten notes, while local reporters broadcast live from the steps. Neighbors said they'd never forget the sound of sirens that morning or the image of two little girls being led from the house, wrapped in blankets. Sarah's younger sister was placed permanently in foster care, her identity protected by the state. She would grow up carrying the memory of that morning, the sound of her own screams, and the face of the sister accused of causing them. In the months that followed, prosecutors continued building their case. Forensic specialists testified about fingerprints, ballistic matches, and data extracted from Sarah's phone. Investigators found no signs of an intruder, no forced entry, and no outside DNA. Everything pointed inward. By summer, the community no longer debated who had done it. They only wondered why. Sarah Grace Patrick's trial was scheduled for early 2026. Until then, she sits in the Carroll County Detention Center, awaiting judgment. The smile she once wore in court has disappeared. What remains is the silence of a teenager who studied true crime long enough to believe she could write her own. Months passed as the case against Sarah Grace Patrick continued to grow. By the time the trial date was announced, the story had already spread far beyond Carrollton. News networks, podcasts, and online commentators all had their versions of what happened. But inside the courthouse, the truth was quieter, darker, and far more complicated. Prosecutors opened their case with the digital evidence. They presented the timeline built from phone records, app activity, and text messages. Every minute of that night had been reconstructed. The searches, the screen time, even the step counts. At 11:38 p.m., her phone showed movement. At 11:42, the home Wi-Fi connection blinked off, then on again. Minutes later, both her parents were dead. The medical examiner took the stand next. He described how each victim had been shot once in the head at close range. Both wounds were instantly fatal. He explained that the stepfather's LVAD machine had triggered its alarm moments after his heart stopped. The alarm Sarah admitted hearing, the one she never responded to. Then came the forensic specialists. They testified that gunshot residue had been found on a sweatshirt in Sarah's bedroom. DNA from both victims was detected on its sleeve. The defense tried to argue contamination, but the evidence was overwhelming. When detectives played clips from Sarah's TikTok messages to the court, the atmosphere shifted. The room fell completely silent. In those messages, she had talked about the murders as if they were an interesting mystery, something to analyze, not something she lived through. Her words, spoken casually to strangers online, had become the prosecution's most haunting proof of indifference. The defense tried to humanize her. They spoke of her youth, her academic record, and the trauma she endured growing up in a turbulent home. A child psychologist testified that Sarah had been under severe emotional stress, possibly dissociating from reality. They painted her as a lonely girl, not a monster. But the jurors had already heard too much. They'd seen the photos, the search history, the messages. They knew about the argument days before the murders, when Sarah told a friend she couldn't take it anymore. They knew she had access to the same gun later used in the killings. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Each day, Sarah sat motionless at the defense table, eyes fixed on the floor. Her father, seated in the gallery, refused to look away from her. The small-town courtroom became a place of unbearable silence, one family divided between grief and disbelief. When the verdict came, it was swift. Guilty on all counts. The judge spoke calmly as he delivered the sentence. 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. Sarah didn't cry. She didn't speak. Her expression was blank, as if the reality hadn't yet reached her. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited in the heavy Georgia heat. The crowd was smaller now, quieter. The cameras followed the police car as it pulled away, carrying the 17-year-old girl who had once studied true crime for fun and ended up becoming the subject of it. Inside the courtroom, the family of James and Kristen Brock sat holding each other's hands. There were no cheers, no sense of victory, only exhaustion. Justice for them felt heavy. Sarah's younger sister wasn't in court. She's being raised by relatives in another state, far from Carrollton, her name kept from the public. The nightmares still come, the therapists say. Sometimes she dreams of that morning, sometimes of her sister. Years from now, people will still talk about the case. Some will call it a tragedy of youth and obsession. Others will call it pure evil. But everyone who followed it will remember the same haunting image, a teenage girl sitting in court, staring at the floor, the quiet echo of a life she can never